With yet another publisher sale, my visual novel backlog gets ever larger. And that's not the only thing getting larger, if you catch my drift. My tweet count has been going through the roof. Aren't you following me yet? Iwaihime is a horror visual novel game that is extremely unsettling as it takes you into a world that focuses on the theme of curses. Strike down the dark riddles of dolls and suit in this we can read. Just get to the review.
それは違うと思うよ。もう殺すわよ。
じゃあバトルスタート。
かっこいい。もしかしてスキャンダル冗談なのか。そうだけど。
Having only read one other visual novel from Ryukishi, that being the famed Higurashi, I got what I pretty much expected. The best way to describe this game is that at some points it feels like Higurashi, at some points it feels like Chaos Child, and at some points it feels like Ryukishi popped an edible, said this edible ain't shit, experienced a 15-hour-long trip, then looked next morning at his newly updated Iwaihime script and said, I love this. The main theme of curses is relatively interesting, but it is pretty much on par for the course for Ryukishi, so he can do whatever he wants. That's not to say this visual novel isn't well written, but due to some aspects of the main curse and the delusionary nature of this game in general, you'll find that somebody or everybody abruptly dies or goes crazy due to some initially nonsensical event, and then it never happened, and we are back where we started. A huge part of this is that the perspective shifts a lot and you get a hefty amount of time from each main character's point of view. You know, like Higurashi. The cast felt relatively fun. The protagonist is Suzumu Susuhara, and he is perfectly alright. His family has been training in a specific martial art for 1,000 years, which is cool and all, but his personality doesn't interest me very much, and he feels as bland as you can get with a voiced protagonist. The main female character is Toei Kurokami, and the last name Kurokami doesn't inspire much hope, does it? But after editing all day, I can relate to this face on a personal level. Tsubakiko Harumiya is a distant relative of Suzumu and dreams of being the perfect wife, unless you piss her off. Kanai Minobe is the laid-back club president of the club that about 90% of these school-based visual novels have to have. Her section of the story is also the weirdest. Riria Nunokawa is the kohai who works as hard as she can to be a popular idol. I picked her first because fuck you, idols are made to be liked. The more secondary characters of the bunch are the nurse Mayu Hinagata and Suzumu's greatest male friend Natsuya Atsuta. Mayu is more of the elder sister type who loves to go on long, logical rants, but overall, she's the caring advisor for the club these characters all find themselves in. Whilst the other female characters have their seemingly bloodthirsty moments, she is pretty much always a fountain of joy, But nobody has as much energy as Natsuya, who shouts every 3 seconds and makes reference to a card game that he plays with Suzumu that sounds suspiciously a lot like. The best part about this visual novel is its themes and how they are conveyed in each section of the story. The story is divided into a first half that sets up the characters, the history of the curse, the aspects of the curse itself, and the goal of the curse. The second half has you tackle each character's aspect of the curse in the order of your choice, besides Toei, who must be done last, and technically Mayu after that if you happen to buy the DLC. I mentioned earlier, but the protagonist really doesn't have much of a personality. Suzumu is caring and determined to train in his family's martial arts, but besides that, he basically just serves as the female character's love interest as well as plot problem solver. For sure, the best scenes of the game are when he is not being focused on. This visual novel feels a lot different in the latter half than the first half, but they really don't pull any punches right off the bat. But once you get past the first chapter and OP, things calm down to a school slice of life for a little bit, which may not be to everyone's liking. The curse feels ominous until you're given the prerequisite needed information, and then the second half of the game feels a tad formulaic. Speaking of formulaic, I discussed a lot of story outside this part than I normally do, but I wanted to get across a couple of things. The topic theme is about curses, but the whole reason for the curse in the first place is due to a much more realistic theme: greed. Greed ends up being a prominent theme throughout the character arcs, though there are a lot of minor themes for each arc as well. I did Riria's route first, and her route is more about her desire to return to her formal glory as an idol, considering she was a popular elementary idol. The second second route, quote unquote, I did was Kanai's, whose route was a fucking fever dream and a half. Her route puts on display her family problems, especially with her mother's boyfriend, who is the embodiment of greed itself. Finally was Tsubakiko, whose route actually felt the most grounded in reality, if you can get past the whole stalking and child predator thing. My favorite character did end up being Toei in the end though. The post-main plot fan service scenes were great, and Toei is very precious in them. So just stop playing after the pool scene and you'll get your happy ending. That's all I can say. The extra chapter DLC you can buy involves Mayu's curse and the problems she faced when she was in high school because of it. This is definitely the hardest to read in the game, and I even skipped some of it. The one delusion she has in particular made me want to vomit. The story takes place in 2 different times. One is when the curse occurs, and the next is the main time you'll come to know 1,000 years later. At first I wasn't sure how I felt about this, but I ended up liking how everything connected. Deer have a lot of positive symbolism poetically, but here they are the main image of the curse, which is an interesting image reversal. I've already said a lot. Since the Steam page's picture previews have some pretty telling CGs, I went a little more descriptive than I normally do. But let's talk about everything else. The game has many CGs, and they are all very good at setting the dark tone of this visual novel. Some of them even scared the shit out of me, so props to them. As for character sprites, if you like yandere eyes, I can say this game has yandere eyes. If you like color variety in your CGs, one of the characters are occasionally seen in a bright fantasy world that contrasts everything that the game has done up until that point. The soundtrack is actually pretty good, honestly. There are some good tracks for each kind of feeling a scene should have, and a lot of decent tracks in general. It's cheating, but my favorite would probably be the instrumental of the OP. If I had to pick another one though, it would probably be That's a Good Thing, because it reminds me of Kadoa Shoujo's soundtrack for some reason. This visual novel has ample settings, but not a setting for having voice lines continue playing even after clicking. That one setting is about half the settings I realistically need, so it not being here is a big blow to me, honestly. In conclusion, if you want a good visual novel that will creep you out, Iwaihime is great. Its story might not be the best paced at times, but if you can get past the early slice of life bits that I would suggest trying to appreciate more anyway, you may find the horror in this visual novel appealing. I gave this visual novel a 7.6 on VNDB, which is the only time I have felt compelled to give a more specific score. This visual novel feels more like an 8 than a 7, but it's not entirely there for me, so this was my compromise. But to really conclude, best girl, Toei. Best scenes, one with Toei. Favorite voice actress, Toei's. Worst place to stub, your Toei. I'm going to hell for that one.